Okay, we're looking in the book of Exodus this evening, and last time we looked at the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments in Exodus chapter 20, and I just want to give you a little survey or a little summary of these laws. Remember, the Decalogue, the 10, was God's moral law. There's 10 of those things, and then there's a civilian law, civil law, and there's spiritual laws. Altogether, they tell me that if you count all of them, there's about 613 or something laws that govern the nation of Israel. And so it's a lot of laws, but it's like when you have a nation, there's a lot of laws that govern the nation. So the Bible, the Old Testament law, was what governed the nation of Israel. Some of those things are for us today. When the New Testament reiterates it for the church, but some of those things was more just for the nation of Israel. It was their constitution, their laws. So we don't go under everything Old Testament laws to Israel, because we're not Jews, we don't have a nation. But some of the things are universal, like the moral law of God. It was right before the law was written. It was the things that pleased God. It was during the time of the Mosaic covenant, and it's still good after the Mosaic covenant. So the Decalogue, as they call it, it was good for all areas of all people of all times. And we looked there at the moral law there last week, and then there's the social law, which would be community laws. And a lot of the book of Exodus is involved with that, and then also a lot of the book of Leviticus. Leviticus is that book that's and we're not going to go verse by verse and have more of a topic in that book. And it's a little bit difficult to read. It's all those laws that do this and do that. And sometimes it's hard. You can read that. You need to take your time when you read it. But, to them it was very important to understand. And as God made these laws, what He wanted the nation of Israel to know, that they were a nation like any other nation. I mean, other nations, their laws were not based upon holiness and one God, and there was no morality in it. There was, they didn't have all the things about marriage and different stuff like that. The nation of Israel was a different kind of law. And just down through here in Leviticus, for instance, there's laws about motherhood and raising families, what to do with lepers. That was a disease. In our country, we have disease control. So we had the CDC. They had what do you do with lepers. That was the disease that was so devastating. So it tells you how to handle leprosy. What would priesthood, and they looked at all the. We're going to look a little bit into the priesthood and some of the details of it, but it outlined that master-servant relationships. That was how their economic system was based upon. So it tells about how they would handle that. Personal purity regarding the sexual things of the country, because you think we have a mess. The land in these days, all the different kinds of ungodly immorality was going on was crazy, and what God was telling the nation of Israel to be between the relationship between a man and a woman, and not multiple people, and all these different things, that was totally odd. That wasn't anything in the book during their day. And so, this was very important for them to understand. Israel was going to be a different nation. Did they always follow it? Well, no, that was the problem. Unclean issues, there was all kinds of issues that they dealt with. Personal injuries. What happens if you get injured? What happens if you injure somebody? What happens if you accidentally kill somebody? There's all these kind of laws that they dealt with there for the nation of Israel. Property rights, about owning property, and what happens if you have to sell it or give it up. It was all sacrificial animals, which was going to be a big part, about clean and unclean animals, about the blood, the land, usage of the land, and obedience in the land, results of disobedience in the land. The nation of Israel was set up that the land was that blessing to them. And God said, as long as you follow certain things, that you'll continue to have that blessing. But if you don't follow me, not being obedient, we'll take away those blessings. So this was all involved blasphemy and vows, the Sabbath. the Sabbath was very important, and there was instructions on what to do. Okay, all these things was involved in the social things, and we'll come across some of those things as we go along, but that's sort of the groupings, and all these are very detailed in the book of Exodus and Leviticus, and you may want to look some more time in that. Also, if you have the Wilmington Guide to the Bible, he goes through that very clearly too. And sometimes he's got some charts in there to help you understand different things, and that would be a big help. Then the spiritual code, laws dealing with Israel's worship life, the feast, and sacrifice. Now we'll cover a little bit more in this. That describes how they worshiped in the tabernacle. We'll cover the feast, the different feasts that they had, and the sacrificial system, which was all these was a real key to the spiritual life of the nation of Israel. So we're going to look at these things tonight. I'm going to go over to chapter 24 in the book of Exodus. Now, last week we looked at chapter 20, which was the Ten Commandments. Now, if you read, and after the Ten Commandments were given, chapter 21, chapter 22, and chapter 23 gives a lot more detailed laws, okay? Chapter 20 was just the 10. And those other chapters gives a lot of laws in there. All right, so if you want to go back and read all those laws, you can on there, because it's interesting. Well, how would they guide your life, and what were they for? Okay, but you can read that and you can understand that. Chapter 24 here is a real neat chapter here that shows us a little more detail in this time that that Moses had with God. In chapter 20, it was sort of like God just gave us this oral view of the law. In chapter 24, we're seeing a little bit more about the whole procedure of Moses actually going up to God and what it was like in his glory. And here we're seeing where God actually not giving only an oral law, but he put some of the law in stone at this time. Some of the law was given in stone. Later on, Moses had to write a lot of those laws into the scrolls that they had. And he had a long time to do it. He had 40 years in the wilderness later on to write down a lot of stuff that God had told him, and the history and the doings of it. And so chapter 24 is a neat little chapter here that fills us in some good stuff. And so when he said, or God said to Moses, "Come up unto the Lord, thou and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu." Now Nadab and Abihu was the sons of Aaron. Okay, they're the sons of Aaron, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship you afar off. So now here again is this description of God getting ready to give all this law to Moses. He said, "You come," and then the 70 of the elders, 70 spiritual leaders that they had picked out to help with the nation. But he said, "Now, but you worship afar off." Remember how it was difference between the old covenant and the new covenant? In the new covenant, we're said through Christ we come near to God. We go into his presence. But in this Old Testament time, Old Covenant, it was you can't just come running into God in any old way. He was trying to teach the nation of Israel that he was holy God. He was unlike any god, their false gods that they ever knew about. You just don't come into the holiness of God with all your dirt and filth, is what he was trying to teach them. "And Moses alone shall come near the Lord, but they shall not come nigh, neither shall the people go with him." So some of the people got to go up toward the mountain, and then Moses went all the way. And Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments, and all the people answered with one voice and said, "All the words which the Lord has said we will do." Now, what is he talking about here? What did he say here? Well, part of it was not only the law given, but it was sort of like, and we're going to see in here, a tablet was written. there was the old covenant. The covenant was this agreement between God and the nation of Israel. Okay? And basically, God was saying, "Are you willing to do this and this and this, and be obedient? And if you do, I will give you blessings. If you don't do this and be disobedient, I will bring curses to you." Later on in the book of Deuteronomy, which is really the name of the book, means the second giving of the law, Moses went in details of those blessings and cursings. But right now, he just sort of goes into this thing and in a big overview, it says, "You agree to do everything God says." Oh yes, we agree to do everything God says. Well, that didn't go too long, did it? As we know in the story. "And he sent young men of the children of Israel, which offered burnt offerings and sacrifice and peace offerings." I'm going to read verse 4, talking about building this altar. "And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord, and rose up early in the morning, and built an altar under the hill and 12 pillars, which for the 12 tribes, according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the children of Israel, which offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. Later on, we'll discuss the different types of offerings, the burnt offerings, the peace offerings, and these different things. Moses took half the blood and put it in the basins, and half the blood he sprinkled on the altar. They took the blood of the covenant, they took the book of the covenant, and read in the audience of the people, and they said, all that the Lord has said we will do, and be obedient. Okay, they agreed to the Old Testament covenant, and the covenant was ratified by this blood. Okay, it was by the blood of the bull and goats. Remember, like the Old Testament, in the book of Hebrews, says now we understand we're not saved by the blood of the bull and goats, but in this Old Testament here, it was what ratified the covenant. We're saved in the new covenant. We understand we're saved by the blood of Christ, but this was a blood covenant in the Old Testament that they were entering into, and it was a solemn covenant. It was ratified that they were making a promise to God in this covenant. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, behold, the Lord, blood of the covenant, which the Lord hath made with you concerning all these words. And so we look at these things, and in 21st century people say, oh, that sounds nasty, But in those days, that was how they did things to show how solemn it was. And, it made you stop and think. It made you stop the seriousness of something. When we see something, blood being shed, we're very much aware of a life that was taken. It was something died because of that blood that was shed. And so that was what they was trying to get across. God was trying to say, this is a serious thing we're going into here, not to be taken lightly. Then went up Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 of the elders of Israel, and they saw the God of Israel. Now, understand what Moses is trying to get across. The Bible says no one has seen God at any time, and later on, Moses wanted to see God, but he wouldn't do it only, but that's just through a sort of like just a glimpse through the backside of him. But what he's seeing is this glory of God. Because even remember when we studied the book of Revelation, when John was seeing the throne of God, he just see sort of a bright emerald and diamonds and glow. It was that glory is what he saw. The glory of God. Because the Bible says, Jesus said, no man can see the Father except through me. But Jesus said, if you want to see the Father, you see me. But he got a glimpse of God in all of his glory as much as he could. And I think they saw this Shekinah is what they saw. It's the same thing when Jesus was on earth, when he, on the Mount of Transfiguration, when he allowed the disciples, as he peeled back some of like his flesh in a way, and they saw it. It was just a bright shining light. It was the glory of God, and so this is what they saw. And they were under his feet as it were paid work of a sapphire stone, as it were the body of heaven in its clearness. It's like God here for the people of these few who came. It was like God gave a little piece of heaven there on Mount Sinai, wasn't it? When we study the book of Revelation, when John saw his visions there of the throne, that's what he would see, the sapphire and these beautiful things. So there on Mount Sinai, this is how important this was. God was bringing a little bit of heaven down to earth so they could get a glimpse of who they were dealing with. They were dealing with a holy God, an eternal God. And upon the nobles of the children of Israel he laid not his hand. He also, and they saw God and did eat and drink. And the Lord said unto Moses, come up to me on the mountain and be there, and I will give 3 tables of stone and a law and a commandment which I have written, that thou mayest teach them. So there's the 3 tables of stone. You've always thought the 10 Commandments are 2 tables of stone. What's the 3rd table? Well, it's evidently that covenant. This covenant that he has been going to give to the people, that this is what you're promising to do. Okay, it's like a contract. I will give the table. It does say, I said 3, it says the tables of stone. Well, you got to see that right off there. I don't know why I was thinking 3, but it was the tables of stone that had the covenant there in it. And then, of course, the 10 Commandments, as we say. The other was the covenant. Well, it was written to them in the book. Later up there earlier, he said he opened the book up. And so evidently, the covenant he wrote out in a scroll. Okay, but here give you the tables of stone. and a law and a commandment which I have written, that thou mayest teach them. Okay, so this is what he was give to them to see and to read. So this was important here. And Moses rose up, and his minister Joshua, and Moses went up to the mount of God. And he said to the elders, tarry ye here for us until we come again unto you. And behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. If any man have any matters to do, let him come unto them. So this is, Moses, he goes up. He puts Aaron and Hur in charge, which later on, as we find out when he's up there on the mountain, Aaron lets things get out of control. But this is why he did. He put Aaron in charge. And Moses went up into the mount, and a cloud covered the mount. Okay? Again, it's just like, in Revelation 9, or Exodus 19, about the cloud, the thick darkness of God. It was just like, it was just sort of veiled, so you could not see that Shekinah glory. And so Moses was up there in this. And the glory of the Lord abode above Mount Sinai. And the cloud covered it 6 days. And the seventh day he called unto Moses out of the midst of the cloud. And the sight of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the eyes of the children of Israel. And Moses went into the midst of the cloud and gat him up into the mount. And Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. And so then after this week that God spent, he spent this 40 days up there in the mountain with God. And now, what was he doing up in them 40 days? Well, not only did he got the law, according to the next few chapters, he was getting all the instructions to build the tabernacle. Now, I'm going to take a section, not tonight, but I'm going to cover the tabernacle as a separate unit. We'll look at that, and we'll look at the pieces of the tabernacle and their purposes, and also the priest and all these things. But in chapter 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, and 31 is all these chapters that deal with the tabernacle. And he was very detailed, and everything that would be built and how it would be built, who would be the supervisor on the job and everything. And that's all covered into this chapter. We're going to cover the tabernacle in just in a separate section. We'll get to that shortly. But I'm going to go to chapter 32, because that takes us at the end of the 40 days that Moses was up on the mountain. And this is a very well-known chapter, and I know that you probably know the story of this chapter, but Moses was on the mountain during his time. Now 40 days is a fairly long time, isn't it? It's over a month, and Moses was up there, and the people began to think that Moses, what happened to Moses? Did he die up there? Did God take him? What happened to Moses? So chapter 32, and when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mount, the people gathered themselves together unto Aaron and said to him, make us gods, which should go before us, for as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we wot not that it become of him. We don't know what happened to him. Now make us gods. Now where in the world did they get that idea at? Egypt, yeah. Egypt hadn't got out of these people yet, did it? They was used to gods. They were used to, they wanted to see something. Now, boy, just 40 days earlier, they agreed with Moses that they were going to follow God in his ways. They were going to follow him in a holiness and in his way, and they would worship one God, the Lord God Jehovah. They was going to do that. It only took 40 days for these people to give up, to say, let's make gods. And so Aaron, I don't know, Aaron probably didn't know what to do, and so he went along with them. And then he decided, we'll just try to make the best of this thing. Aaron wasn't a very strong leader. Aaron was a good talker. That's the reason God put him with him. But he didn't have any strong leadership. He didn't know how to get this crowd back in line. And basically, he let the crowd just carry him along in this thing here. So Aaron said unto them, so he's now in charge of making this idol. Break off the golden earrings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them unto me. And all the people brake off their golden earrings which were in their ears, and brought them unto the people, Aaron. And so they had all these golden earrings, and they come out of Egypt. Remember, the people of Egypt give them a lot of stuff. They took a lot of things. They give it to them, And now they had this stuff, so now they're going to melt them down. And he received them at their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool after he had made it a molten calf. And they said, "These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt." And so they had to say, okay, Moses said Jehovah brought us up, but we don't know what Jehovah looks like. And they took a god, and Egypt had a god of the bull, the god of this calf, and they said, he's a strong God, it's a powerful God, and we want to have this God now, we can go before us. Big mistake. Big mistake. They're going to see that God wasn't going to tolerate this. And as we get down into this story, it's amazing, and too, how they thought that they could take the polytheistic thinking, the world thinking, and sort of mix it in with the teaching that they had, and God would be all right with it. Which is just like today's world. People take a lot of this philosophy and a lot of that kind of philosophy, and they take a lot of this thinking, a lot of that thinking, and say, we'll just mix it in this bag of other biblical stuff, and God will be all right with it. Wrong again. God's not all right with a bunch of worldly, humanistic philosophies that's mixed in with His truth. And that's what they were trying to do, and we see that God was not well pleased with this at all. And where in Saul he built an altar before it, and Aaron made proclamation, said, "Tomorrow is a feast to the Lord." Now notice, Aaron uses this word Lord, Yahweh. And so there is Aaron's thinking that you could take this God that they made and make it represent Yahweh. Now, what was the second commandment they give? You don't make any graven images. Moses had already given that part of it. Don't make any graven images. Well, that didn't last too long, did it? And they rose up early in the morning and burnt offerings and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and to drink and rose up to play. And this was called, this word play here is the idea of immoral things going on. What were they trying to do? They was trying to put the worship service of Egypt into the worship of God, the holy God of Israel. In other foreign and all these other types of polytheistic religions, immorality and things are intermingled right in with the worship. And so what do? They just intermingled in here with the worship. And they tried to mix in burnt offerings and peace offerings, and where, God's going to be well pleased with that. We're doing these offerings, but we're just adding this and we're adding that. We just add all our little parts. Boy, that sounds like the church in the 21st century many times, isn't it? God, we're going to put this part of the world in our services, and we're going to accept this philosophy in our services, and God, you're going to be all right with it. No, God's not all right with it. We serve a God that's, He has His plans and His ways, and we need to get on page with that. And the people of Israel was going to find this out. And the Lord said unto Moses, "Go, get thee down, for the people which thou broughtest out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made them a molten calf, and have worshipped it, and have sacrificed there, and said, These be thy gods which have brought thee up out of the land of Egypt." So God was right aware of the things, and the Lord and Moses was talking about this. And the Lord said to Moses, "I have seen this people. Behold, it is a stiff-necked people." And God says a couple of things here to Moses, and I believe God has a plan, and God told Abraham that his nation is going to go on and on, and He says some things here to Moses, and this is going to be used as a test for Moses also. He was going to see, well, what kind of leader is Moses to the people? What kind of love did he have for the people? What kind of, a good leader for a nation will intercede for them, and stand with them, and plead for them. And that's what he was going to see. So God says to Moses, "Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may wax hot against them, that I may consume them, and I will make thee a great nation." He says, "Moses, let me just get rid of this group of people, and I'll just start over." And here we see one of the two intercessory prayers in this chapter by Moses as he intercedes for his people. Look at what Moses says. And Moses besought the Lord his God. So he goes to prayer and he speaks to the Lord. And he said, Lord, why doth thy wrath wax hot against thy people, which hast brought forth out of the land of Egypt with great power, with a mighty hand? Wherefore should the Egyptians speak and say, for mischief did he bring them out to slay them in the mountains, and to consume them from the face of wrath, to repent of this evil against thy people? Remember Abraham. And he goes back. Moses was aware of the covenant that he made with Abraham. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, thy servants, to whom thou swearest by thine own self, and says to them, I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have spoken of will I give it to thy seed, and they shall inherit forever. Okay, and the Lord repented of the evil which he thought to do unto this people. Now, understand what, the translation there sounds like God was going to do sinful things. Evil's not a sinful thing here, it's a terrible thing. And basically, it's the way he put this is God changed his mind. That's a pretty strong statement if you can pray that God changes his mind. That's strong intercessory prayer. We saw that in Genesis with Abraham, going to God in intercessory, and God told him, if I could find, about in Sodom and Gomorrah, he said, if I could find 10 righteous people, I won't destroy it. That's the power of prayer for people to intercede. God says, this is what I can do, but for your prayer's sake, I'm not going to do it. And I think he was able to see the leader that Moses was through this. If Moses would have said, yeah, God, let's burn them all. Let's just torch the people. Let's get rid of them. He knew that he wouldn't have had the heart of a leader like what he wanted. And he said Moses stood up for the people. And he was going to deal with their sin. And Moses was going to deal with their sin, but not destroy the nation. And Moses turned and went down into the mountain, and the two tables of testimony were in his hand. The tables were written on both of their sides, and on one side and on the other they were written. And the tables were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God graven upon the tables. And when Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said in the camp, there's a noise of war in the camp. He thought there was a battle going on. And he said, it is not the voice of them that shout for mastery, neither is it the voice of them that cry for being overcome, but the noise of them that sing do I hear. They were having a big, as old Vance Havner used to say, they was having a hootenanny down there. They were having a big old hootenanny down there, and they were just out of control. Out of control ways is not the way you worship God. They were just out of control. And it came to pass as soon as they came nigh to the camp that he saw the calf in the dancing, and Moses' anger waxed hot, and he cast the tables out of his hand and brake them beneath the mount as a symbolic gesture to them. Here's these great commandments you've agreed to keep with, and you've broken them all. I'm just going to break the tablets before you all. And he took the calf which they had made, and to burn it with fire, and ground it to powder, and strawed it upon the water, and made the Israel drink it. He grounded the thing up into like a powder, and just mixed it into water. He says, now, you want your God, now drink your God. Basically, he was interceding for the people, for the God not to destroy them, but he wasn't going to let their sinful ways pass. And the leaders of this group was all going to be dealt with in a very severe group. And most of the time, to get a nation to do what they did, it took a small group of probably strong leadership. And these were kind of the people that Moses was going to deal with, and they actually got rid of them because they were not they were like cancer to the nation. These were strong people who had ties back to Egypt. And Moses said to Aaron, What did this people unto thee that thou hast brought so great a sin? Why in the world, Aaron? He started saying, why in the world did you let this happen? Aaron, are you nuts? What's going on? What he was saying. And Aaron said, Let not the anger of my Lord wax hot. Thou knowest that the people, that they are set on mischief. These kids, boys will be boys, and he just got them up with this lame excuses, and then he makes a real, he said, for they said unto them, make us gods which shall go before us. For this Moses, the man which brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we want not what has become of him. And I said unto them, whosoever hath any gold, let them break it off. So they gave it to me, and then I cast it in the fire, and there came out this calf. This is this craziest thing. Craziest thing. I threw all this gold in the fire, and it came out a calf, Moses. Boy, that's Aaron, he was trying to save his hide, wasn't he? He knew that he'd made his brother very angry. But the problem is, he not only made his brother angry, he made his God very angry. And so Aaron was in the middle of this thing. And Moses saw the people were naked, for Aaron had made them naked to the shame among their enemies. It was just a terrible thing. They were being shameful in front of their people around them, the world that they were living in. And people was looking, if there was any other foreign folks in an area, they saw these things. He said, what are these people? Are they nuts? This is supposed to be the God of Israel. These people are supposed to be worshiping this God, and they brought great shame to God and to their nation. And now this Moses stood in the gate of the camp. I like this. This is a great verse here. Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, who is on the Lord's side? Let him come unto me. And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together unto him. And the tribe of Levi here gathered together and said, we'll stand with you. And I think this is the reason Levi became the priestly tribe. They stood with the Lord. They stood with God. And God was going to bless them with this priesthood down through the time. And he said unto them, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, put every man his sword by his side, and go in and out of the gate to gate throughout the camp, and slay every man his brother, and every man his companion, every man his neighbor. And the children of Levi did according to thy word of Moses, and there fell that people that day about 3,000 men. I think what it was, these were the ones who stirred up all this controversy. These were the ones who were taking a stand and trying to get the nation of Israel to go back into the ways of Egypt. Although they brought people, delivered them out of Egypt, there was some set on being like the Egyptians. That old Egyptian culture, that old Egyptian world just stuck deep into their souls. How many times as folk in the church, they go out, maybe they get saved, but boy, that old world just stuck down in their souls. And what do? They want the church to act like the world. They want the church to behave like the world. They want the church's morals to be like the world. This is what happened here. And it was a terrible thing, and 3,000 people died because of this sin. And Moses said, consecrate yourselves today to the Lord, every man upon his son, upon his brother, that he may bestow upon you a blessing this day. And it came to pass on the morrow that Moses said to the people, you have sinned a great sin. And now I'll go up to the Lord, peradventure I shall make an atonement for your sin. He said, you've sinned, now I'm going to go up and make atonement and see if God will cover this sin. Now this is the second great prayer of Moses in this chapter here. And Moses returned to the Lord and said, oh, this people have sinned a great sin, and made them gods of gold. Now listen to this great verse here. Yet now, if thou wilt forgive their sin, and if not, blot me, I pray thee, out of thy book which thou hast written. And what a great prayer, what a great love for people as a leader. These people, they got what they deserved, but Moses still loved the nation of Israel. And he said, God, if you can't forgive them, let me die in their place. And I'll just take me out of your book of life. That was quite a prayer, wasn't it? He was that much of a leader who had a love for his nation that wasn't perfect, and they had problems, but here he was, this leader. And the Lord said to Moses, whosoever has sinned against him will I blot out of my book. Therefore now go, lead the people into the place of which I have spoken unto thee. Basically, said, God says, I'll take care of the ones that have sinned, Moses, and I want you to go on and lead the people. Behold, mine angel shall go before thee. Nevertheless, in that day when I will visit their sin upon them. And the Lord plagued the people because they made the calf which Aaron made. And basically, here, God sent some plagues to basically as chastisement to the people for their sins. And so this was a very serious matter we find in the book of Exodus. If God would have let this slip, the nation of Israel would have went down the drain in a hurry. And so God had to take this nation it was It was monotheistic. It was one God, not multiple gods. It was a God who demanded a holiness in the people. He wasn't going to let them be like a nation like every other nation of the world. And that's what they wanted to be. God said, right now, you're going to learn you can't be that way. And so God came down hard on the nation of Israel here. And, when God sort of does, when sometimes in the initial stage of something new, God will let you know what He thinks about the situation. He did this here to these people to understand it's a very serious matter. Just like when the church began in the book of Acts in the New Covenant, remember what happened in the early church about Ananias and Sapphira and their hypocrisy? They showed hypocrisy in the church, and God killed those two people for a statement that says, I won't tolerate, I will not put up with hypocrisy. It's not of me, and I won't put your blessings on the church. So there was another big statement at the beginning of the church age, just like here was a big statement at the beginnings of this Old Testament Mosaic covenant time. So that gives us a start here, okay, where we're at with the God here on the Mount Sinai with Moses. The commandments were given. We see that. There was the covenants were given that they made with them. We see how that they immediately followed the leadership of some poor people, poor leadership, and they took the wrong path, and God came down hard, and Moses came up and made them pay for it. But yet Moses was a man of a heart of love and compassion, and a great intercessor. And so you can go to God on behalf of other people, and that's a great thing to understand, isn't it? How many times have you went to God for your people, maybe your family, and say, God, they've sinned greatly, but I just plead for you. I just plead for them. Sometimes God will change. God will hold back His wrath for your prayers, for your people. And so I think that's a good thing to understand, and a good thing to take to heart here. You can go to God in prayer for anything, for any cause, for any reason. And I think God we learn under the effective, fervent prayer, God sometimes will respond in ways because of you. God didn't. He showed His mercy, didn't He? Again, we find out that God is quite a God of mercy to the people of Israel. Well, that'll wrap it up for tonight, and we'll